Today I'm taking a closer look at this album, Who Are You by The Who. It's a powerful album, but it's also a heartbreaking one. This would end up being the last album Keith Moon ever played on. Just weeks after it came out, he was gone. And the cover, him sitting on a chair where it's labeled not to be taken away. It's very eerie, almost like a warning no one noticed. But behind the music was a band falling apart, studio chaos, and a drummer who was fighting for his life. So let's talk about the story behind the album and the tragedy that followed. Today I'm talking about Who Are You, the 8th studio album by The Who, released on August 18th, 1978 in the UK through Polydor Records, and August 21st, 1978 in the US through MCA Records. There's a lot going on with this album, but I think this album will always be remembered as the last album with Keith Moon before his death. He died on September 7, 1978 in Mayfair, London, in the United Kingdom. He was only 32 years old. His death was caused by an overdose of a drug called clomethazole, which is a prescription drug intended to treat or prevent symptoms of alcohol withdrawal. He had been prescribed the medication to help him combat his problem with alcoholism. The night before his death, Keith Moon and his girlfriend, Annette Walter Lax, had attended a party hosted by Paul McCartney. They returned to the apartment Keith Moon was renting from Harry Nilsson. Keith Moon was found unresponsive the next morning by his girlfriend. Police determined that he had consumed 32 pills, far exceeding the recommended dosage. While it was an overdose, his girlfriend believed it was accidental, not intentional. The story also has a strange twist, as it was almost predicted on this album cover, so let me explain. Who Are You was the last studio album to feature drummer Keith Moon. He passed away a few weeks after the album's release. The album cover famously shows him in a chair, where you can see right here, labeled not to be taken away. And it's a very unusual detail given his death right afterwards. I did some research on the meaning behind the chair. I know it looks like some type of conspiracy theory behind it, but the photographer Terry O'Neill, he had Keith Moon sit on the back of the chair facing the camera. For a practical reason, it was to hide his distended stomach, which was a symptom of his alcoholism. And the label not to be taken away was just part of the chair's actual markings. Maybe it was a prop rental company or a studio, but it wasn't intentional. That just happened to be there. And it ended up being like this chilling premonition. His death was literally taking him away from the band and the world, and it's kind of like this random sign on a chair, which kind of has a heartbreaking meaning. The timing is very strange, almost prophetic, but in the end, it's just a coincidence. Despite being taken away, Keith Moon's contributions to the band will always be part of The Who's legacy. The chair, in a morbid way, symbolizes his final fixed position within the band's visual history. But with that being said, let's look at some of the events that led to the creation of the album. The creation of the album was complex and challenging. There were personal struggles, artistic directions, and a long gap between albums, at least for 1970 standards. The previous album was released in 1975. It was called The Who by Numbers. Then after this, the band became inactive for a few years. The members pursued various solo projects. There wasn't really time for them to work as a band. The recording process was also very difficult. There was Keith Moon. He was probably the biggest issue because of his problems with alcohol abuse and drugs. And I spoke a little bit about that before. Producer Glyn Johns and John Astley found that his timing was off. There were times he couldn't learn the songs or keep the tempos. There was a track, Music Must Change, where he was unable to play the jazzy 6/8 rhythm, leading to the drums being removed entirely and replaced with footsteps and cymbal crashes. He was also very difficult to work with, and his bandmates became very frustrated with the fact that he wasn't really himself anymore. He also had lots of behavior problems, like setting a bulletin board on fire, but these were all signs that these were his last days. Then there was Pete Townshend. As I said before, he was somebody who was working on all these different projects. Not only that, he was a family man, so he wasn't always present. He kind of looked at this album like it was an office job. Sometimes he had to leave the studio early to pick up his children, so he had to miss a few sessions. Pete Townshend also brought in some 24-track demos, which clashed with Glyn Johns' preference for working with 16 tracks for better sound quality, and Pete Townshend was also experimenting with synthesizers, building songs with loops and program parts, and that brought in a change in the band's traditional sound. There were problems with the studio itself. The Dolby noise reduction system at Rampart Studio was often misaligned, and that led to inconsistent sound from day to day. When the sessions moved to Rack Studios, there were further delays because of equipment malfunctions, including one backing track being completely wiped away. There was also a lot of tension in the band. There was one incident with Roger Daltrey punching Glyn Johns during an argument over a mix of Sister Disco, where Roger Daltrey wanted more bass and Johns reacted strongly. As a result, it led to Johns largely delegating Daltrey's vocal production to John Ashley. The band members were also drifting apart. They were pursuing solo projects like I spoke about before, and there were times when they really didn't want to work together. Finally, there were some health-related problems. For example, Roger Daltrey underwent throat surgery, which made the band delay vocal recordings. Pete Townshend injured his hand putting it through a glass window during an argument with his parents, and that delayed the work. And keyboardist John Rabbit Bungrick broke his arm falling out of a taxi at the studio, and that led to Ron Argent being called in as his replacement. But despite the problems, the album turned out to be pretty good, with some classic tracks, so let's talk about them. I mentioned before that Pete Townshend wanted to experiment with synthesizers, and that was apparent on the track New Song. This one has some synthesizers that could be heard throughout the song. It has complex arrangements and a reflection of Pete Townshend's exploration of new sounds, and the lyrics are also about songwriting and the evolution of music. And New Song here is track number 1. There was a song called Had Enough by John Entwistle. This track was co-released as a double A-side with the song Who Are You? And you can see right here as track number 2. This one has some more synth and features a thumping bass line by John Entwistle, and he also does vocals. The song was originally intended for a rock opera project by John Entwistle that never came to fruition. The song also features a full-string orchestra. There's another track, track number 3, called 905. This was written by John Entwistle. Another song had some synth arpeggio and futuristic lyrics. John Entwistle also does lead vocals on this one. Kind of strange, it was a mix of sci-fi and country rock. But one of the most popular songs is here, track 4 on side 1, Sister Disco, written by Pete Townshend. Not actually a disco song, it was a critique of the popularity of disco when the album came out in 1978. It also had lyrics from Pete Townshend's Lifehouse project, which was something he was working on in the early 70s while they were recording Who's Next. It was one of those songs that captured the classic Who sound with more of a rock sound. Also included acoustic guitars on the outro. And side A ends with the song Music Must Change. This was a theatrical and introspective song. The song was about the state of the music scene in the late 70s with a title that says Music Must Change. The song actually features a lot of different musical changes throughout the song. Roger Daltrey gives a really great vocal performance, and there were lots of jazz and blues elements. This was also the song I was talking about before that Keith Moon was having trouble playing. Then on side 2, it opens with the song Trick of the Light. This was written by John Entwistle. It's a straightforward hard rocker. This is the Who getting a little heavy, like almost playing with heavy metal. It's a really strong bass riff. John Entwistle uses the 8-string bass, and Keith Moon gave a really good drumming performance. There was another song by Pete Townshend that came after it on side B called Guitar and Pen. Another song about songwriting. Keyboards by Pete Townshend and more awesome drumming by Keith Moon. Has some classical composition mixed with hard rock. After this is track 3, side 2, Love is Coming Down. It's a ballad. I would say it's the official ballad, a song about searching for love. Song features layered vocals, string orchestration, and a strong vocal performance by Roger Daltrey and written by Pete Townshend. But the final song, probably the biggest one, it's called the title track, Who Are You? This is the one that everyone knows. It has that jazzy synth, kind of a slow dance speed in the beginning. But then by the time the verses come in, it's just pure hard rock, rock and roll. Lyrics were inspired by an incident where Pete Townshend was found in a Soho doorway by a policeman after drinking with Steve Jones and Paul Cook of the Sex Pistols. Roger Daltrey gives a pretty aggressive vocal delivery. This is one of the songs where they actually drop an F-bomb in the songs, not something that they did often. And it was something they did in the studio. It wasn't written into the song. And the song features Ron Argent of the Zombies on piano. And it was a big hit because it was used in the opening credits of the TV series CSI Crime Scene Investigation. So I'm pretty sure you have heard it there. That is all. Let me know what you think of this album. Is it one of your favorite albums by The Who? In the meantime, let me direct you to another classic rock album I did recently about Rubber Soul by the Beatles. I'll stick that here. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please give the video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do content related to physical media on this channel. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.